You're not going to believe what happened when this entitled HOA board member, Brenda, decided to throw her wedding on my property without asking. I was just minding my own business when I discovered she'd set up the whole event catering, alcohol, a big party right on my land. The sheer audacity was stunning. But here's the twist. I wasn't just some random homeowner. I'm a federal agent. And when I say things got out of hand, I mean they really spiraled. What could have been dismissed as a misunderstanding turned into something resembling a full-blown operation. I could have tried to ignore it, but something felt fundamentally wrong. She had zero idea who I was, yet there she was, hosting her wedding on my property like she owned the place. I wasn't about to let that stand. So, I did what any federal agent might do in that situation. I decided to turn the tables. What happened next? Let's just say things escalated quickly. Stay with me here, because the way this situation went from tense to potentially explosive, and how this wedding ended in a way nobody saw coming, well, you'll want to hear the rest. Let me give you some context. This wasn't just any patch of grass. It was property I'd worked hard for, invested in, and meticulously maintained. The HOA had always been a minor nuisance, constantly trying to enforce petty rules, but this stunt was on another level entirely. They'd pushed boundaries before, but this time, they blew right past the line. I started hearing whispers around the neighborhood about a wedding, but no one mentioned anything directly to me. It wasn't until I saw a line of cars parked down the street and tents popping up on my land that I realized what was happening. By then, it was too late for a quiet intervention. When I walked over and saw Brenda, a notoriously difficult member of the HOA board, acting like the lady of the manor, there was no way I was letting it slide. She hadn't asked permission, hadn't even informed me. The more I thought about it, the more infuriated I became. I might have considered giving her a chance to explain or make it right, but her dismissive attitude, like it was no big deal, sealed it. That's when I decided I had to take matters into my own hands. I wasn't just going to let her walk all over me and my property rights, especially not with alcohol being served, creating a liability, and definitely not when I had the authority to address it properly. But as I made the call to set things in motion, I truly had no idea how chaotic the situation was about to become. As I stood there, watching the wedding unfold on my property, my frustration mounted. People were laughing, dancing, completely oblivious or indifferent to the fact that they were trespassing. It was like property lines and basic respect meant nothing. And Brenda? She wore that entitled smirk, acting untouchable. I could overhear her boasting to guests about how she always gets what she wants and never needs to ask permission. Her smugness was infuriating, and I could feel my anger simmering. I wasn't the only one fed up, either. A few neighbors had quietly mentioned to me that this wasn't the first time Brenda had pulled stunts like this. She apparently had a history of bullying residents and using her HOA position to control situations. But this time, it felt personal. She wasn't just bending the rules. She was trampling all over my life, my hard work, and my boundaries. I called a few of my colleagues to discuss the situation discreetly. This had escalated beyond a simple neighborhood dispute. It was a blatant violation, compounded by the serving of alcohol. The potential risks were significant. If anything went wrong, liability could potentially fall on me, the property owner, even though I had nothing to do with organizing the event. I needed to act, and act decisively. I watched her from a distance, completely unaware of what was brewing. Little did she know, I had already contacted the appropriate people. An official intervention was about to begin. The tension was palpable. How would the guests react when authorities arrived? Would Brenda have a meltdown when she realized the person whose property she'd commandeered was someone who could bring the whole party crashing down? There was no turning back now. As the evening wore on, the tension only thickened. I stood at the edge of my property, observing the scene. Guests were getting louder, the music was thumping, and Brenda was holding court in the middle of it all, acting like royalty. But inside, my mind was racing. My colleagues were getting into position. Everything was set for the official response. The gravity of what was about to happen sent a shiver down my spine. This wasn't just about stopping a party. This was becoming serious. I took one last look around. The way Brenda ignored common courtesy, her utter disregard for rules, it was like she felt invincible. Little did she know, her time was running out. I'd never felt so conflicted. Part of me just wanted to walk up to her and say, "You made your bed, now lie in it." But I knew that wouldn't be enough. This felt bigger than just her or me now. It was about upholding boundaries and putting a stop to this entitlement. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from one of my colleagues. "We're ready." A surge of adrenaline shot through me. This was it. Decision time. I walked back towards the gathering, my heart pounding. Just as I was about to make my presence officially known, Brenda turned towards me. Our eyes locked. A tense moment passed. I could see a flicker of something, not quite recognition, but an awareness that something was wrong. I could feel the weight of the situation hanging in the balance. This wasn't just a wedding anymore. It felt like a showdown. But just as the tension between Brenda and me reached its peak, something completely unexpected happened. A shadow moved near her, and before I could react, a voice cut through the noise. "What do you think you're doing?" I turned to find another man, someone I didn't recognize, but who carried himself like an HOA official, stepping up with a smug smile. He held a champagne flute, clearly enjoying the unfolding drama. "You're the one causing trouble here, aren't you?" he said, his tone dripping with arrogance. Didn't think anyone would actually try to ruin the party. I didn't know him, but his words made it clear he was fully aware of the situation. This wasn't just Brenda's impulsive decision. This looked like a more coordinated effort. He had to be involved. But how? Why show up now? I felt like pieces were clicking into place, but the picture wasn't making sense. Why reveal himself just as things were about to escalate? His nonchalance about being on private property told me everything. He wasn't just a guest, he was part of the scheme. Let's call him Greg. Before I could confront Greg, the flashing lights of a couple of unmarked cars appeared through the trees. My colleagues. They were moments away. But just as the intervention seemed inevitable, Brenda shot me a look that suggested she knew something I didn't. My stomach clenched. Was she prepared for this? Had she planned for something even bigger? The game had changed. It wasn't just about protecting my land anymore. It felt like I needed to figure out what countermove she had planned. The air felt charged as I stood there, watching Brenda and this mysterious Greg exchange a knowing glance. The unmarked cars were getting closer. I could hear footsteps approaching through the trees. My colleagues were almost here. But something still felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling I was missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. As I started to move towards them, Brenda suddenly raised her hand, signaling for quiet. "I know who you are," she said, her voice a strange mix of confidence and defiance. She turned to Greg beside her and nodded. "You really thought you could take me down with your little stunt?" I froze. "What are you talking about?" That's when it hit me. Greg wasn't just some random HOA crony. They were part of something much larger. Brenda had planned this all along, using her wedding as a cover for something far more serious. I'd been so focused on defending my property rights that I hadn't seen the bigger picture. They weren't just breaking HOA rules. They were potentially using the HOA structure as a front for some shady operation, and this wedding was the perfect distraction. But just as I started processing this, the truly unexpected happened. The unmarked cars I'd been waiting for my colleagues suddenly stopped, turned around, and sped off down the road. I blinked, completely confused. What on earth was going on? That's when Brenda smiled an eerie, satisfied grin spreading across her face. "Oh, didn't I mention? I have connections too. That little raid you called for? It's not going to happen." I felt the ground drop out from under me. It was like everything I thought I knew, everything I'd been so sure of, was unraveling right before my eyes. But there was one final twist I hadn't seen coming. Brenda's phone buzzed. She glanced down, and her confident smile faltered for just a split second. She looked back up at me, her expression shifting from smugness to something else. Something unreadable. "You know," she said slowly, "you're not the only one with connections. Let's just say we're all about to find out just how deep everyone's loyalties really run." The ground beneath us seemed to shift again. As I turned, instinctively looking towards where the cars had disappeared, I saw something else entirely. Two different federal agents stepping out from the shadows of the trees. Their eyes were locked directly on Brenda and Greg. It was instantly clear they weren't here because of my call. The moment felt like it stretched into an eternity as the two agents approached. But as they stepped fully into the dim light of the party, I realized with a jolt they weren't focused on me at all. Their attention was entirely on Brenda and the man beside her, Greg. Turns out, Brenda's unauthorized wedding wasn't just an act of supreme entitlement. It was tangled up in a much larger federal investigation that had been ongoing for months. Agents had been tracking her and key members of the HOA, including Greg, for various illegal activities. My finding them on my property and my subsequent actions were just an unintentional catalyst upon landing on the right square at the right time in their much larger game. I stood frozen, watching as the agents calmly moved in, taking control of the situation. As they handcuffed Brenda and her accomplice Greg, the thick tension that had permeated the air finally started to dissipate. The truth was out, and it was far bigger than a simple property dispute. My instincts about Brenda's character had been right, but the reality was more complex than I could have imagined. Brenda's smug attitude completely crumbled as she was led away, her defiant wedding dreams shattered. One of the agents turned to me briefly, acknowledging my unintended involvement and mentioning that while my report helped precipitate the timing, the real credit belonged to their long-term undercover investigation. As the night finally came to a close and the last of the bewildered guests dispersed, I couldn't help but reflect on the sheer chaos of it all. Sometimes, standing up for what's right, even on a small scale, can inadvertently pull you into much larger currents. What started as a personal battle against an entitled neighbor ended up playing a small part in exposing something far more significant. The whole experience was a stark reminder. Don't back down when you know you're in the right, because you never know where that path might lead.